Um, I'm so excited to be back here in Nepal. I think this is my fourth time to be here to get to visit Teach for Nepal. And I'm always so inspired by the commitment of the fellows and the impact that you are having in the communities where you've worked. What I've started to see from the alumni, I'm so inspired that you all keep coming back together twice a year, and I'll share a bit about why I'm so inspired about that, but I think your ongoing engagement and reflection with each other is such a key to kind of growing the collective impact of Teach for Nepal over time. And as you know, we were so inspired by Teach for Nepal's example that we convened our whole global community here in October for a week or so, so that we could learn from your example. And also, it's just always such a pleasure to be here. As Shasir explained, I got started in this amazingly enough. I mean, I can't even believe it myself, but 30 years ago. And it's just been such an incredible privilege. I mean, I feel incredibly lucky to have found my way to this idea as a college student 30 years ago, because I can't imagine a more fulfilling pursuit to be able to work with such incredible people now all around the world. I mean, if someone had told me 30 years ago that I'd still be doing this and that it would take me to Nepal and to 50 other countries and growing, I would have been, I wouldn't have believed them. But I thought I would share with you all, especially given, I guess what brings you here, together and the mission that you're all collectively on, kind of my most salient learnings from this journey. I still remember 10 years in, actually, Teach for America at that time was celebrating its 10th anniversary, and we had convened 1,000 alumni of Teach for America, and we were reflecting on what we'd learned and where we were going. And I still remember this point where an alumna, a woman who was part of the first cohort, stood up and pointed to the vision statement. One day all children will have the opportunity to attain an excellent education. And she said, you know what's happened to us? We've gone from thinking this is the way the world should be to thinking this is the way the world could be. Like, we could actually do this. And I thought I would share my biggest thoughts about what it will take to actually do this. To actually reach the point where all kids have the education and the support and opportunity to, as we now articulate it, Teach for All is our vision, shape a better future for themselves and all of us. So just three big thoughts. And hopefully this can help inform the discussions that you all continue to have throughout the day and really throughout the rest of your kind of journey for impact. So the first thought is that leadership is really the core of the solution, and that this approach of ours to intentionally cultivate the local leadership capacity we need is really an unparalleled contributor to the kind of leadership we need. And I thought I would just share what leads me to say that. So first of all, as you well know, and I've heard actually many of you even in the course of the last day articulate some of your most salient learnings from teaching in the villages where you taught, which is that this is a really big and complex challenge, right? And I think any of us who are engaged in this work realize, successful teaching alone is not going to lead us to the day when all kids have the chance. I mean, there are so many changes that will need to affect. And the notion that ultimately what changes systems, like addresses complex issues like that, of course it's people. We need people at every level taking this on. And what I've seen over time, I'm kind of amazed to see actually as Teach for All plays itself out in such diverse cultural contexts, the degree to which the Teach for All network partner alumni ultimately exert the kind of leadership we need at every level. So after this, I'm going to go to India, which is really engaged in a similar process. Maybe 5 years after Teach for Nepal, they're in their 10th year, they're thinking about their strategic plan for the future. And I think about where they are in India in their first placement site, which was Pune, India, and what their alumni are doing 10, 11 or so years in. So they've placed 500 people in Pune over time, and a couple hundred of them, 200 of them are still teaching. 300 of them are alumni, and most of those folks, like you all, are still engaged in one way or another in expanding opportunity for kids. A group of them asked the school system to give them 10 school buildings, and they launched reimagined schools in those buildings that are getting totally different results for kids than most schools in the public system, showing people what is possible. Another group of alumni, and maybe some of you are familiar with this example, I'm not sure, but started something called LIFT that each year now retrains 1,500 government teachers using the kind of Teach for India methodologies, puts them in cohorts, provides them with coaching and whatnot, to incredible effect. That the evaluations have shown that these government teachers, some of whom have been teaching for 25 years, are now getting really different results with their kids. Another group of them started the India School Leadership Initiative that recruits and develops cohorts of school principals. Another group started something called City Connect that brings different stakeholders in the system, business people, government stakeholder, government leaders, NGO folks, together to think through together strategic plans for improving the system. And now they're launching another group called the Pune Children's Zone to connect early education and school to career supports to each school. So I just think about that example because, I still remember being there about 8 years ago and hearing someone introduce himself as having just been put in charge of the region and saying, I just got back from a network learning trip at Teach for All. We went to New Orleans and we saw that it's possible to build a movement to change things for kids, and that's what we're going to do in Pune. And I remember it so clearly because he was saying that to a group of people who were there for kind of a fundraiser who were so skeptical. I mean, they were thinking this young kid who said he just finished his Teach for India fellowship, he's just been put in charge of this region, we're going to build a citywide movement to change things for kids, and they were thinking, there's no movement here. But there is a movement to change things for kids in Pune. And it's not all because of these Teach for India folks, right? There are so many people who are deeply engaged in that effort, but it's really hard to imagine how it would be happening if you took out all those Teach for India people whose energy and leadership and entrepreneurship has done so much to fuel the change. And that's just one example. I feel like I see so many similar examples. I was in Chile earlier this year. They have 500 alumni 10 years in. 30 of them are working in the ministry at every level, including the right hand and head of policy to the minister. They're running schools that are showing people that totally different results are possible. They've launched efforts to retrain teachers. I mean, the patterns are really incredible, but the thing that is common really more than anything is the degree to which these folks end up exerting from many different vantage points at different levels of the system and outside the system the kind of leadership we need to really change systems. So that's my first thought, is that we are really on to something. Like, given our objective of actually changing the system so that it works for all kids, we're really on to something with the notion that, with a lot of leadership, we really can change things. And the last thing I'll share on this point is just, I think probably the thing that I see often that really fuels this conviction for me is the fact that in the US now, Teach for America has been working in some communities for 20 or 30 years. And in those communities, we can see not only a lot of those same initiatives happening, like people running excellent schools and retraining teachers and starting initiatives to improve social services for kids and such, but we see the aggregate outcomes for kids shifting dramatically. And I could give you so many examples of urban areas and even rural communities across the US where we've seen graduation rates raised by 20 or 30 percentage points, proficiency levels raised dramatically, where it would just be really hard to imagine how that would have happened without the energy and leadership of these Teach for America alums. And I'm going to give just one example to bring it to life. I still remember when I was graduating from college, so this is 30 years ago, the Secretary of Education in the US saying that the worst school system in America is Chicago public schools. And probably many people in the US still think of it as the most entrenched, there's deeply entrenched poverty, just extremely challenging conditions, and it's always been one of the lowest performing school systems in the country. And yet in recent years, it's become clear that Chicago public schools are actually among the very fastest improving school systems in the country. Kids between the years of 4th and 8th grade, based on these very reliable kind of national assessments, that's 5 years, but the kids in those years are making 6 years of progress. The percentage of kids from the Chicago public schools who get college degrees has gone from 9% to 18% in the last decade. So these are like really meaningful results. The graduation rate has grown significantly as well. And if you, again, took all the TFA people out, so 1,000 of them are teaching and on average are moving their kids forward by a year and a half's worth of progress in a year's time. 260 of them are in school leadership roles, 80 of them as school principals, and they're running the fastest improving, highest performing schools in the city. And then they're also in multiple other roles. So one of them runs the Chicago Public Education Fund, which is a collective action organization that brings together everyone in the city, the donors, the government stakeholders, to work together to develop the collective plans to improve the system. Other social entrepreneurs have started incredibly game-changing kind of social innovations that are helping kids access college and then supporting them through college, and have had significant impacts on the college retention rate of the kids who've grown up in the low-income communities. So all to say, leadership does matter, and ultimately it changes outcomes for kids. The second thought is about the kind of leadership we need. And I've come to think that, I think in the US, probably, I'm sure this is not the case in Nepal, but we have such an individual notion of what leadership is. We think about the heroic leaders, the entrepreneurs, the Steve Jobses of the world. I mean, it's so much what our leadership paradigm is. And over time, maybe in part influenced by kind of different cultures and contexts, I've started realizing that the kind of leadership we need is collective leadership. And what I mean by that is, first of all, we need leadership at every level of the system. We need students and parents and teachers and educators and policymakers and people across sectors all working together. It needs to be such a diverse and inclusive group of people. A group that includes especially the people who've most experienced the inequities, the kids and the families themselves. And it needs to be a force of folks who are not all with their heads down, each focused on their individual pieces of the puzzle, but who actually make the time and create the space to build relationships with each other and grow a collective understanding of what they're working towards for kids, who have debates and discussions and work their way towards ensuring that we're all kind of rowing in the same direction. I'm going to share just a bit about the journey I went on that led me to come to think that that kind of embracing a collective orientation towards leadership development is so fundamental in this. So I go back to my younger self and what I was thinking in the early years of Teach for America. And we had started working in these school systems in low-income communities across the United States that had so little capacity. I mean, I'm sure you're working in your schools in these villages and you're thinking there's just so little capacity. Believe it or not, there are really developing contexts within such a resourced country as the US, which is why we started Teach for America. But so it just felt like we don't even need to worry about what goes on in terms of policy and whatnot. There's no capacity in the system. So we were just fully obsessed with saying we need to focus on teachers, school leaders, people working in local school districts. Like, that's what we need to focus on. Let's try to get every one of our alumni to either stay in teaching, become school leaders, or work in school systems. And then one year, there were a couple of people appointed to school district, like actually mayor positions in the US, who were very aligned with kind of the values and principles of Teach for America. And we realized, wow, like the combination of political leaders and capacity in the system, we can move so much faster. So then we started thinking, okay, that's the game. Like, let's worry about people at every level of the school system and political leaders. And a few years later, those political leaders were essentially voted out of office because they didn't have the community's support. So they were doing these kind of game-changing, very controversial education reforms, but they didn't have the people with them. And we realized this doesn't work. If we have only the people in the system and the political leadership without deep community engagement on the part of students, parents, and actually teachers and educators hugely, we'll never get there. So it just became this piece where you start realizing we need everyone. Leadership is everything, and we need leadership everywhere. I think some of the incredible innovations that we've seen coming out of Teach for India, for example, which are showing us that we can move so much faster when we have partnerships between students and teachers working to reimagine education in schools, has led us to realize not only do we need the adults in the puzzle, but we need students really so much at the table working to change things. And then as I progressed, and again, it's so interesting to see what's happening in communities where we've been going at this work for 20 or 30 years. So I can now see in some communities in the US, places where we have leadership in every part of the ecosystem. I mean, every piece of the puzzle, there are leaders going at it, working to change things for kids. But where we haven't somehow built the space to pull people up from individual pursuits and have a collective conversation. And in those places, we feel we're so stuck. So those are the things that are leading me to realize how intentional we need to be about ensuring, one, that we're cultivating leadership for every piece of the puzzle, two, that leadership is diverse and inclusive particularly of our students, but three, that we don't really want, but have in fact built the muscle to step up from the individual pursuits and create the collective vision, which, by the way, is why I'm so excited to see this gathering. I mean, I'm gonna somehow capture this and spread it across the network, because part of this is from the early days of these kind of movements, making the space and time to ensure that you all are getting to know each other and are sharing with each other and are reflecting on what more we need to do to really accelerate progress so that we can have a collective discussion and a collective pursuit. The third thought about this journey has to do with, I think what I've seen is that to produce the kind of transformational change that we're all in pursuit of, we need deeply locally rooted leaders who have trust and relationships and deep understanding of local culture and context. And at the same time, those locally rooted leaders can move so much more quickly when they're globally informed, meaning exposed to what's working in other contexts. So I think both of those people are so crucial. Both of those pieces are so crucial in terms of being both locally rooted and globally informed. The local rooted piece, I think, has, I think about, I don't know if any of you have met Kaya Henderson, who's now part of the Teach for All team, and who was a Teach for America alum who became the school superintendent in Washington, D.C. And she came into a situation where the community was so unhappy about education reform in the city that they voted out the mayor. And so in that context, she was brought in as the superintendent. And we watched Kaya essentially go out to the community and say, instead of telling you, what it is that I'm going to do, I'm going to work with you. Let's analyze the problem, and we're going to work together to develop the solution. And from her efforts, we saw firsthand how important it is to have leadership reflective of the communities in which we work, who deeply understand those local communities and values and traditions, and can lead from that perspective if we're going to have any path to the kind of really transformational change that she then oversaw that produced, at that point, the fastest improving urban school system in the country. And at the same time, as much as it's so crucial, and we see so much evidence of how crucial it is to be deeply rooted in communities, I think about, actually going back to that Pune example, would we have the level of momentum in Pune if those alumni of Teach for India hadn't seen firsthand what a whole bunch of Teach for America alumni were doing in New Orleans that had produced really radical changes for kids? If the people who took over those 10 school buildings hadn't then gone around the world to visit the most transformational schools for low-income kids to understand what they were doing so that they could bring those practices back to Pune. So that's the other piece that makes me so excited about the work of Teach for All and about this room full of people, because we're realizing how much we can accelerate progress if we can figure out how to get you all who are pursuing similar things to people in other parts of the world to connect with each other so that you can inform each other's work and hopefully move more quickly as a result. So those are my biggest thoughts of the moment. They're what give me so much inspiration about what you all are doing and the impact that I know you'll have over time here in Nepal. And also the ways in which what you do here I know will speed up progress, all across our global network and all across the world. So thank you so much for all that you do, for all that you're giving to the Teach for All network in terms of inspiration and insights and all. And I just really look forward to continuing the journey and seeing how you progress in your efforts over the coming years. Thank you.